In this video, we are going to be learning about conditional statements and how to write the converse, inverse, and contrapositive of conditional statements. We'll start by asking ourselves, what are conditional statements? From the word conditional, it means if this happens, then this happens. They are implication statements. If this happens, it implies that this other happens. So we usually represent it by something like if P, then Q. This is just to write it in symbol form. If P, then Q. We'll use an example to learn how to write it both in sentence form and in symbol form. This is the symbol form apart from this if that is here. If P, then Q. Let's use a statement, a conditional statement. If you live in Lagos, then you live in Nigeria. So this is the example we'll be using. If you live in Lagos, then you live in Nigeria. So we can see this is the condition. If you live in Lagos, then you live in Nigeria. The first part of a conditional statement is called the antecedent or the hypothesis. Antecedent means the first statement made, and this last part, we usually call it the consequence or the conclusion. So this is the antecedent and this is the conclusion. We are going to get because these two statements combined together as a conditional statement. So let's write out the statements we have. Let's say that P is this antecedent part of the conditional statement. P is you live in Lagos. And Q, the statement Q will represent you live in Nigeria. So when we want to now write the conditional statement in symbol form, we'll now say P, and then this our symbol that means then or implies that Q. So we can say it in word form. If P, then Q. If you live in Nigeria, then you live in Lagos. Easy, right? Good. Let's delve into writing the converse statement. So converse. Let's learn how to write the converse of a conditional statement. Converse will say, we'll start from the consequence, then end up at the antecedent. So converse in symbol form will just be Q, then P. Easy, right? Let's write it in word form. The converse is if. It will now be if you live in Nigeria, then you live in Lagos. So in word form, if you live in Nigeria, then you live in Lagos. Okay, let's also start checking whether these statements are true. If you live in Lagos, then you live in Nigeria. The conditional statement that we're using for this example is definitely true because Lagos is inside Nigeria. So if you're living in a place inside Nigeria, you are living in Nigeria. Let's look at the converse statement. If you live in Nigeria, then you live in Lagos. When we check this, Lagos is inside Nigeria and there are other parts of Nigeria. So if you live in Nigeria, you may or may not be living in Lagos. So this is not always true. So this could be a false statement. Let's learn how to write the inverse of a conditional statement. Inverse will now be the inverse of this conditional statement. Inverse is just the negative of the conditional statement itself. So we have not P, then not Q. That's what inverse is, negative of a conditional statement. So in word form, we'll say, if you do not live in Lagos, or if you don't live in Lagos, then you don't live in Nigeria. You can see all these are easy. If you don't live in Lagos. So that's the negation, the negative of the statement B. If you don't live in Lagos, then you don't live in Nigeria. Okay, so we can see that. Then the last part is for us to write the contrapositive. Contrapositive of a conditional statement. Positive. The contrapositive statement in symbol form is just the negation of the converse statement. Inverse is the negation of the conditional statement. Contrapositive is the negation of the converse statement. So we look at the converse statement. So it means it will be not Q, then not P. In word form, if you don't live in Nigeria, then you don't live in Lagos. Let's write it down. If you don't live in Nigeria, then you don't live in Lagos. Okay, let's check for true statements. We've already agreed that our conditional statement is true because Lagos is inside Nigeria. If you live in Lagos, you definitely live inside Nigeria. Its converse is not true because if you live in Nigeria, then you live in Lagos. There are other parts of Nigeria you can be living at. Its inverse, if you don't live in Lagos, then you don't live in Nigeria, is not a true statement because there are other parts of Nigeria. So if you don't live in Lagos, you can live in other places. That means you can still be living inside Nigeria. So this is true, this is false, this is false. Let's look at the contrapositive statement. If you don't live in Nigeria, then you don't live in Lagos. So this is true because if you're not living inside Nigeria, there is no how you can be living inside Lagos. Why? Because Lagos is inside Nigeria. We can see that the conditional statement and the contrapositive statement are both true, while the converse statement and the inverse statement are both false. And it follows with other examples of conditional statements. Usually, the conditional statement and the contrapositive statement always return same value. Like if conditional statement is false, then the contrapositive statement will also be false. If the conditional statement is true, then its contrapositive statement will also be true. However, if the converse and the inverse always go together, they always return the same true or false value. So, like in this our example that we have that the converse statement is false, its inverse is also false. Now, let's look at another example. This example says if you pass grade 1, you can be in grade 2. Oh, this is a conditional statement. You should have then you can be in grade 2. If you pass grade 1, then you can be in grade 2. So we write out the two statements coming from this conditional statement. We have P to represent you pass grade 1, and then Q to represent you can be in grade 2. Now we are going to write the converse, inverse, and contrapositive statements from this conditional statement. And we're going to be writing them in symbol form, then in sentence form. Let's start with converse. Converse will always start. Okay, let's even write our what's it called again? Conditional statement in symbol form. So conditional statement is P, then Q. So converse will now be Q, then P. Q, then P. So we can now write it in sentence form. You can be in grade 2 if you pass grade 1. Or if you can be in grade 2, then you passed grade 1. Anyhow you want to write it, but that's just the converse of this statement. So we have it as, okay, let me start with if. if you can be in grade 2, then Q, then you passed grade 1. If you can be in grade 2, G2 for short, then you passed grade 1. Okay, so its inverse statement will now be the negation of the conditional statement, not P, then not Q. And when we write it in standard form, it becomes, if you don't pass grade 1, if you don't pass grade 1, then you can't be in grade 2. Simple, right? Easy peasy. We have the contrapositive statement. Contrapositive in simple form, so the inverse of the converse. Okay, that's the negation of the converse. Not Q, then not P. We write it in sentence form. If you can't be in grade 2, then you didn't pass grade 1. If you can't be in grade 2, as the teachers can't allow you to be in grade 2, it means that then you did not, right? So you didn't pass grade 1. And let's look at it again to confirm, because we said contrapositive and conditional statements are usually same value. So you can't be in grade 2, then you didn't pass grade 1. If you didn't pass grade 1, you can't be in grade 2. So we can see they are both true. And for this particular example, we see that its converse is actually true. So this is the kind of conditional statement that can return what we call biconditional statements or equivalent statements, because the inverse and the conditional statements and its converse are true. Because we say if you can't be in grade 2, then if you can be in grade 2, sorry, then you passed grade 1. So we can see these statements, they are true, both the conditional statements and the converse statements. So that is when we can now have something we call equivalent statements or biconditional statements. And the symbol will no longer look like this, because this symbol P then Q is true, Q then P is true. So for biconditional statements, biconditional, we have them when both the conditional statements and the converse statements are true. So biconditional statements is P, and then instead of having forward like this, we have it both backwards and forwards are true, is true. So from this our example, if you pass grade 1, then you can be in grade 2. And when we do the converse, we have if you're in grade 2, then you passed grade 1. So we see what we mean by biconditional or equivalent statements.